Good morning, everybody. We have an interesting show today. I want to go ahead and introduce Senator Black. And Senator Black, thank you for being with us today. And I want to pass the floor on to you to introduce our guest, as we will be speaking about vaccines, particularly the hepatitis B vaccine, and some of the implications beyond that that's coming out of the Trump administration. So without further ado, I want to pass it along to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Morgan. Morgan's been very kind to work with me this morning. She's kind of our producer here, but we have an extremely important foreign policy announcement that we're going to do as a separate show, perhaps later today sometime, and it deals with a change in national security policy that is very, very dramatic and I think very positive. But with that said, this particular show, this segment, is going to deal with the question, does hepatitis B vaccine cause autism? Now, we have with us Dr. Elizabeth Mumper, who is former medical director of the Autism Research Institute. She's a board-certified pediatrician with 44 years of experience, and she's on faculty with the Medical Academy of Pediatrics and Special Needs. She is senior fellow at the Independent Medical Alliance, and Dr. Mumper is not necessarily going to conclude what the cause of autism is, but we're going to talk about the recent change in policy at the Center for Disease Control's relative to the hepatitis B vaccine, and why that might be extraordinarily important to parents who are about to have new babies, and how they can protect them potentially from bad results from this hepatitis B vaccine. But in any event, Dr. Mumper has just been up on Capitol Hill testifying, and she was just encapsulating a little bit of her testimony with us before we went on air. Dr. Mumper, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Senator. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, fine. Well, if you would just give us a line or two about what you were doing on Capitol Hill yesterday.
Yeah, so I was there with a wonderful organization called the Independent Medical Alliance, and this grew out of a group called the Frontline COVID Critical Care Alliance. And we stand for the ability for parents and patients to make their own medical decisions. So we were meeting with high-level staffers to talk about no future vaccine mandates, about how parents should not be in a position where a school nurse might give their child a vaccine that they don't know about. We stand for truly informed consent, which means that the clinician must tell the patient both the benefits and the risks of any medical intervention, including vaccines. And this should be a conversation in which the patient can ask questions, not just a routine signing of the form, sign here, and we don't have much time to discuss it. So I was very pleased that we got a very warm reception and a lot of good questions were asked, and we're going to continue to work on that. Idaho has just passed a medical freedom bill that would serve as a good model, and we hope to take that nationally. It wouldn't cost anything, which is quite unusual, but it's very important for parents to be able to make medical decisions for their children.
Very good. Well, I hope that that sort of change in attitude on Capitol Hill is going to evolve into some very positive things. I think for a long time, the Congress has been totally in the grips of the pharmaceutical industry, and they've been willing to overlook a lot of very disastrous things happening to public health. And that leads us into our issue about the hepatitis B vaccine. Could you give us a little lowdown on what's happening there?
Yeah, so this is very exciting. The hepatitis B vaccine in the early 90s was recommended to be given to all newborns. And the hepatitis B is a sexually transmitted disease. Sometimes people get it when they're exposed to blood products or dirty needles, such as drug addicts might encounter. And the thought was that they were having difficulty getting the high risk populations to come in to get hepatitis B vaccines. You know, prostitutes and drug users don't always use the medical system extensively. And I guess operating from an assumption that it would do no harm to the baby, they decided that, well, first day of life, a baby's a captive audience, and we could go ahead and give it to them then. And then they could have follow up with the second and third dose starting at either 1 or 2 months of age, and then again at 6 months of age. I personally never have recommended nor given hepatitis B vaccine to my newborns. I always advise the parents to decline it politely unless the mother is hepatitis B positive, in which case the mother can transmit it to the baby at the time of birth. And there's a whole protocol that involves the vaccine and immunoglobulins that we would definitely go into if the mother was hepatitis B positive. But about 99.5% of the time, the mother is hepatitis B negative, and we know that. And therefore, we are doing a medical procedure that's invasive on a baby on the first day or two of life. And I always had great concerns that giving that shot would interfere with the parental bonding and the ability of the mother to breastfeed if the baby got irritable or had a fever after the shot. So I never saw a benefit for most of my patients, so I advised against it. I'm thrilled that the new ACIP committee, the American Committee on Immunization Practices, is now doing real debate and having real interchange of information and ideas among the committee. From my perspective, for many years, it was sort of a rubber stamp situation where the CDC would present data and then the votes were almost all unanimous. Well, I was able on the train back from Washington to listen to part of the hearings yesterday, and it was wonderful that people were respectfully disagreeing with one another and having a real debate about it. And the vote ended up not being unanimous, and the dissenters got to have their say. So I think this is a huge step forward, and I applaud Dr. Milhone and Dr. Malone, the co-chairs of that committee, for the way that they conducted a very good session, both on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.
Well, that's excellent. Well, just to give our listeners some perspective on this, I was in the Pentagon during the time that Bill Clinton and the Clinton administration was taking over. One of their big pushes was gays in the military and sort of the normalization of homosexual, sort of reintegrating homosexuality into our culture. And one of the arguments made against doing so was related to medical problems that were very widespread within that community, and so it's not just coincidental that at the time that this recommendation was made to give this hepatitis B vaccine broadly to everyone, was to sort of make it seem like this was a medical problem that everybody experienced. It was very widespread, rather than to say, well, it's focused on drug addicts, the gay community, intravenous needle users who are exchanging blood that is often contaminated by the other people who receive this sexually transmitted disease. So it was in that environment that the decision was made. Well, let's start giving these vaccines broadly. And as you mentioned, the idea was, okay, there might sometimes be a false negative if you tested pregnant women, if you gave them blood tests. Maybe you would miss the fact that somebody has hepatitis B. And then, of course, it would be passed on down to the child in some cases. So there was sound theory behind the recommendation, but everything is a matter of balance. And you have to say, well, how about the harm that you produce versus the good that you produce? And
That's a really interesting cultural perspective on it that I hadn't thought a lot about. But I will say that now we know that the hepatitis B testing is one of the very rare tests that literally is quoted as being 100% effective. And there are also 2 times that the pregnant woman is tested during pregnancy. So I think the odds of having a false negative, we never say zero in medicine, but it certainly approaches zero.
so
So I think
it's
that
minuscule.
yes, it's minuscule. That's a great word
Yeah.
for it. You're
Yeah.
exactly.
And so then you balance it out, and there is enormous pressure. Once this begins, of course, the pharmaceuticals, they're making a lot of money on it. And then you have this cultural change towards incorporation of homosexuality in our culture. And so there's tremendous political and financial pressures against looking too closely into any problems that might come up because of this. Now, we don't know with absolute certainty anything, because I don't think there's been adequate research done. Now, we know that autism was extremely rare up until the 50s and the 60s. When I was a child, growing up like in the 50s, children didn't stay inside. They didn't have screens to watch. There wasn't actually even a TV at the beginning. And there was no air conditioning. This was in Miami, Florida. It was hot as blazes in the summer. So kids were outside, they played, and there were lots of children. So you'd be out and you might interact with a dozen or more children on a daily basis. Every day you go out, there's a dozen kids running around and another dozen. And so you interacted very directly with many people. Now, I can recall coming in contact with children who had Down syndrome. I would say that the incidence of Down syndrome back in those days was, at least from my lay observation, was probably about the same as it is today. It does occur, a certain incidents of it, and it did back then. On the other hand, autism, which I encounter and you encounter all the time, it's everywhere now, was non-existent. And I've asked other people, my wife, who, she grew up in this same community on the same street with me, but I've asked her, I've asked my sister, I've asked various people who were, sort of my age range, and none of them ever encountered a single case of autism. Now, so you go from there, where back in the 50s, a pediatrician might expect to never encounter a case of autism in their entire career. And suddenly it's a really major health concern. That tells us that something very dramatic affected the entire population, and it happened at a particular time. It wasn't some infectious disease, so it is something that we have done. You have to look, what are the things that started happening that had never happened before? One of the things, we started having widespread use of birth control. I'm not saying that's what it is, but it's something that ought to be looked at. We started this increase in vaccines, and in particular, when we had the adoption of the hepatitis B vaccine, we had an explosion of autism almost immediately from this. And there's one study that I had out of Minnesota, and this was in Olmsted County, Minnesota, where they did fairly extensive research, peer-reviewed research, and it found a 16-fold rise in the number of children classified as having ASD in a 2-year period. Or let me see, I'm sorry. That is over a 10-year period, excuse me. Over a 10-year period after the hepatitis B vaccine was given, there was a 16-fold increase in the incidence of this problem. Now, it's correctly pointed out that there was an increased awareness, that there may have been changes in the definitional parameters, certainly valid things. But I think it is important to look at lay observers such as myself, and you ask them, okay, you were a child in the 50s, you were a child in the 60s. What did you observe? Did you ever observe autism? No, never, not once. And you can conclude that something is happening, something very dramatic in that period. And so Dr. Mumford, I'm certainly hopeful that folks like you are able to increase the awareness and perhaps get to the bottom of exactly whether this is. What are your thoughts about the hepatitis B vaccine itself? What do you think? Is there evidence that it may have been the cause of autism, or is that so undefined that we just can't say?
Well, Senator, first I would caution us all not to look for the cause of autism. I think that your point about the increasing prevalence, which went from 1 in 5,000 when I was a medical student to 1 in 31 kids today, tells us it can't be genetic, it has to be environmental. And when I say environmental, I just don't mean, air pollution, which is sometimes associated, or mercury smokestacks, which have been implicated also in the research. But I view vaccines as a environmental trigger that we give to children. And I think there is very valid evidence that it may be the most modifiable factor that we could do something about to try to stem the tide of autism. So about 80% of the increase is real. Yes, some of it is due to better awareness and diagnosis, but the careful studies suggest that somewhere around 75 to 80% of the time, it is a real increase. So I have a number of concerns about vaccines. In my practice, about 23% of my patients, and I've evaluated over 600 children with autism, about 23% of my parents, of autism patients say it was the MMR vaccine. About another 24% say it was a bunch of vaccines given at once, especially if the child was sick at the time. And I do think that there's concern about hepatitis B vaccine, which is given at birth. And I'll tell you a couple reasons why. One is that in the first year of life, it's really important to set up a good microbiome, good gut flora that are going to be the seat of your immune system. And if a child gets a hepatitis B vaccine and has a significant fever, which more than 10% of them do, they might end up undergoing what's called a sepsis workup, where people look for a source of infection and they might be given antibiotics. Well, very early antibiotics will disrupt this very important gut microbiome, and that is one potential reason. The other potential reason I worry about is that hepatitis B vaccine originally contained thimerosal, which is a form of mercury, and now contains aluminum. Both mercury and aluminum are known neurotoxins. They are both known to induce autoimmunity, which has also exploded as the autism rates have exploded. And, some babies can handle that because they've got good detoxification enzymes. But babies' livers don't function very well initially, and the liver is the way that you get rid of most toxins. So I am worried that a subset of children can't handle either the old time mercury load, which happened until about 1999, 2000, or the current aluminum load. So those are very real concerns. And there has been research showing that children who get hepatitis B vaccine at the time of birth are about threefold more likely to receive an autism diagnosis. This is particularly true for children of Hispanic descent, and white male children tend to be a little bit protected from that effect. But autism has always been more common in males than females by a ratio of about 4 or 4.5 to 1.
Wow.
And there have been several studies showing this association between hepatitis B vaccine at birth and children who are diagnosed with autism. And my critics will be very quick to point out that an association doesn't prove causation, which is exactly right. But we also have plausible mechanisms now by which hepatitis B could be a problem. So, again, I'm very glad that we're not doing an unnecessary medical intervention on day one of life that has both known and unknown potential risks associated with it. And I think the ACIP committee for making the decision that they did.
Well, it is, you know, it's true that correlation is not causation, but at the same time, if you are the mother or the father of a newborn infant, you want to avoid doing anything that is going to cause that child's life to be destroyed through autism. And so, to me, having medical researchers speculate, I'm not going to take a chance on my child being destroyed by somebody's vaccine. Now, I'm not against vaccines. Yes, ma'am.
Could I point out, Senator Black, what most parents do not know? Hepatitis B vaccine, one of them was studied for symptoms for 4 days after receipt and the other for 5 days. And they only studied it in 147 babies. That is not nearly a big enough group to identify enough side effects or rare side effects. So it almost boggles the mind that something we give to healthy newborns who aren't at risk for hepatitis B based on their mother's negative serology for Hep B, that we would give them something that was studied in such a small group for such a short time. And that, I think, was a huge medical error on our part to adopt a universal practice on such scanty data.
Well, what it tells me, and I was keenly aware of this. I personally led the effort that blocked gays in the military under Bill Clinton. It was a time of very high adventure, and it managed to stave off some of the what we're dealing with for 17 years. But I know the immense pressure that was brought to bear by the gay community on many aspects of our culture, and uh, and so there was tremendous pressure to make these things happen, just get it done. No one can tell me that a responsible scientist or medical researcher can make a decision on something so profoundly affecting the global population as the hepatitis B on such a uh, tiny sample of individuals. To me, that just sort of reeks of a very corrupted scientific policy that for which there is no excuse whatsoever. I mean what was the number that you gave, the size of the sample?
147 babies.
147 babies, and based on that, we give this to millions and millions of people with 147 just simply does not give you a relevant population to study. It's just it. I can't honestly imagine why that would be acceptable to any sort of scientific uh, exploration of something of this magnitude. Uh, Now, I wanted to mention something else as the lay witness, as you might, just sort of the lay observer. When I attended public school, I went to Coral Gables Elementary School, and when we would go out. Now, I always brought a bag lunch. The poor kids had bought bag lunch. The ones with a bit more money bought their lunches there. But as I would go through the line, because I'd always buy a little carton of milk, I would look at the food that the other people were eating that I didn't get to eat, and just routinely, like I think once a week almost, you would have peanut butter and jelly sandwiches served to all the children in the entire school. People were not allergic to peanut butter. And something has very dramatically changed to the population. Something has been made to happen. I can't imagine what it would be. I think it would almost have to relate to something that's happening with the vaccines. Because back then, we would get smallpox. Smallpox vaccine started back in the 1700s, and very, it was sort of a live type of vaccine where you would end up with a scar on your shoulder about the size of a nickel. If you didn't get the scar, it showed it hadn't worked, and they would give it to you again. So we got that, which was certainly warranted. There was a time when I was probably about 12 or so that they invented the Salk vaccine for polio. Polio was a huge problem for children back then, and it was immediately solved, with that vaccine. Certainly warranted. I think the only other one was DPT vaccine. So very few. There were just a few things that children received back then. Now, I don't know how many vaccines are children given these days. It's a lot, isn't it?
It is. By the time a child is 18, the average child that follows the schedule has gotten about 72 vaccines. And the other thing that's happened is that vaccines are given in combinations. So your child might just get one shot, but it might have 5 different ingredients in it. And there is some concern that there were some peanut-like antigens or proteins in some of the vaccines that may have contributed to peanut allergies. We also know that vaccines tend to increase the ability of the body to go into either autoimmunity or allergy over time. So I think that's a concern. So I would just like to say, Senator Black, with all respect, that I do have a lot of friends who are gay. So I would not want those people to feel betrayed by me for not sticking up for them. If, again, with all respect to your beliefs and your advocacies.
Yes, and I respect that, and I don't mean to sort of drag you along. I know you. I don't want to associate you with any of my remarks and concerns, which are very genuine for me. But there is no doubt to my mind that that the implementation of the hepatitis B vaccine related very closely to the Clinton administration's approach on matters involving that community, and I think the studies, the limited information developed to support the validity of the use of this. There was tremendous political pressure, I will just say, at that time. You don't have to favor one community or the other in order to understand that that was a very real political reality at that moment, and something that, along with the financial pressure you constantly have with the pharmaceutical industry, you constantly have enormous financial pressure to implement more and more and more vaccines. Years ago, I introduced a bill in the Virginia legislature called the Canadian Drug Bill, and the idea was it was to legalize, for Virginia purposes, the importation of drugs from Canada, and typically pharmaceuticals from Canada were about a third of the cost of pharmaceuticals in the United States, even though many of them were developed and produced in the United States, but they would be sold at a third of the price that Americans were charged. And so I introduced that. It was extremely popular with people in Virginia. And when it went before the health committee, all of a sudden I was hit with a blizzard of all of this and that. And they took a break. And during the break, there was a close political ally of mine who came over, and he said something very close to this. He said, Dick, he said, nobody on the committee is going to vote for your bill. He said, I have heard this term that the pharmaceutical companies print their own money. He says, now I understand it. He said, there's just no way that you can pass something like this against the opposition of the pharmaceutical companies, because their contributions are such a huge element of campaign financing. And I told him, I said, I really appreciate what you're doing. I said, don't be, I don't want you to, throw yourself on your sword over this. If we can't get it through, we can't get it through. And so when it comes to pharmaceuticals, the financial pressures are so immense that they're almost beyond dealing with. So there are different things. There were the political concerns in 1991 under the incoming Clinton administration. There were the financial interests of the drug companies, And in any event, I'm very pleased that you are doing the work that you do. Obviously, very, very objective in your approach, but I do hope that that you and those that you represent and are allied with can bring some scientific sanity to the way that we approach vaccines. And we need to get to the bottom. Why could anyone eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in 1950, and today they eat it and they drop dead? There's a very distinct reason that for thousands of years people could eat peanuts and suddenly they can't eat peanuts. There's a very important reason why for thousands of years there was no autism. Suddenly everybody's got autism. Something happened. We know approximately when it occurred, and people need to have an open mind and begin to look without political, preconceptions, and take a hard look at these things and say, okay, let's get away from the, if there is a strong likelihood that hepatitis B vaccine is causing autism, I think it is insane for parents to allow that vaccine to be given to their children. I would never, in a moment, I'm not against vaccines. I want my children to have some of the basic vaccines, but I would never support giving them hepatitis B vaccine under any circumstances. So, I don't want them to suffer a lifelong autistic condition just because I do something that's frivolous and nonsensical. And so, anyway.
Well, Senator Black, the other thing I'd like to point out to the parents watching this show is that the childhood vaccine schedule has never been studied in aggregate. They usually just study one vaccine at a time, and they don't usually use a true placebo. They test it against a previous vaccine so that the side effects from the previous vaccine are sort of built into the side effect profile for the new vaccine. So I would caution everyone not to think about, again, the vaccine, but it's probably for different people, different vaccines or different combinations of vaccines, or the circumstances during which the child got a lot of vaccines. I think that all that needs to be carefully examined from a scientific standpoint. And for the first time in many years, I have some hope that those things might actually happen.
Well, I'm pleased that we've got RFK Jr. in the position he's in. I think he's a disruptor, and my goodness, we need disruption in the health arena in the United States. So, Doctor, thank you very much for being with us, and then Morgan, I guess sometime later today we're going to put together a show that will address the new national security doctrine that has just been announced.
Yes, so I'd encourage everyone to join in. And then before we sign off, I just wanted to make a mention of your book, Dr. Mumper, Kids and COVID, a Costly Mistake That Must Never Happen Again. Thank you for your advocacy and looking out for the individual, and kind of, like you said, the all of these different elements that we can look and see that the raising rates of autism, and try and get to the bottom of it scientifically. I think that is kind of something that we forget, is that always scientists and scientific inquiry is supposed to be always continually questioning of things. You're not supposed to have this dogma. So I appreciate you meeting that that the way it should be. So I value your advocacy, and I just wanted to extend a thank you. So appreciate
Thank
you
you
being
so
on
much
today.
for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you. And so that's it for today. But we will have another YouTube video posted very shortly, dealing with the change in national security doctrine.
Yes. And join us next week for our, our scheduled viewing of Focus on the News. But, again, tune in later. So with that, I will sign off. Thank you guys.